Good morning and welcome to another FasTrax webinar. This is a weekly event we do every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern, where we go over various topics of the FasTrax software. You can see these events if you go to our website, goftx.com, choose the FTx Lifeline tab at the top of the screen, scroll down and look for the Webinars button, choose that, and this page will show you the option to sign up for the newsletter to be notified of upcoming webinars, view all of our upcoming webinars and register for those, as well as view the recording for the previous webinars. Today we're going to be going over the time clock and seeing what new features, how things have changed, and how things have been adjusted in this most recent update. So first we're going to look at now you can actually clock in and clock out at corporate. There is a notice on the dashboard here in Director, there's a time card tab. Now to enable this, you first have to set your settings up in Director to have the time card options. So if your user has the admin permission, choose the settings hyperlink in the bottom right hand corner, choose the time clock, and then make sure you have your settings properly set here. We'll go over each of these. If you want to have your time clock in the accounting format, you can utilize this checkbox. This would change it from like 4 hours, 30 minutes to 4.5 hours. You can force a lunch, which would basically force employees to take lunch. You can force a specific lunch length, which in this case, that would mean that if you have the forced lunch enabled, that forced lunch length being set to 30 minutes, that means that I can clock out for lunch, but I can't clock back in before that 30-minute time period is up. You have a lunch entry time clock type, a break entry time clock type. You can go over there's a time clock viewer that was added that we're going to go over here in just a moment that is a really neat new application that's really meant to be used at corporate or really any store location that gives you a quick at-glance view of where all your personnel is. These two boxes are going to be settings for that. You have your viewer store number and how many days is shown in that viewer. So let's go to the other settings. We're going to close this. We're going to go to the maintenance tab. We're going to go to our employees tab. And we're going to choose the manager here, and we're going to edit that. Now, we're going to look at the permissions specific to the time clock. So first and foremost, we're going to uncheck this user group. And if you want them to, if you want this employee to have any kind of permission to do any kind of time clock auditing, whether that be adjusting time clock entries for employees or creating new time clock types, they would need to be the time clock admin. They'd have to have that permission. If you have that permission, then when it comes to the time clock itself, and you choose an entry, it gives you the ability to edit these time clock types as well as edit entries. If you don't have that permission, then this is all going to be grayed out. You can view the data here, but you cannot change it. So we've gone over the director settings. Let's look at the point of sale settings. This would be in direct relation to the store. So I'm going to log in. And this employee has permission, so I'm going to choose the actions, settings, settings. And I'm going to go to the other settings tab. And this has two settings in particular here that we want to look at. The force time clock before using POS and force authorization on all time clock entries. Now the force time clock before using POS does exactly that. If I had this checked, that means before I can even open the POS to ring sales up, I have to be clocked in. This is a great setting to make sure that employees are properly clocked in before they start ringing sales up and they don't come back later saying, hey, I forgot to clock in, I was here at this time, and give you an incorrect time. The force authorization on all time clock entries, what that does is that means that every time you clock in or clock out, it's going to prompt you to reauthorize yourself, as in either use a fingerprint or use your employee number and password to clock in or clock out. If you have this unchecked, then if you're logged into the POS, it doesn't require you to do that. So this is just a great way to make sure that, one, if I'm logged into the register and someone else tries clocking out and they go and press the clock out button, they don't clock me out. It's going to prompt them to log in themselves, then clock themselves out. And two, it means that you can't have any buddy punching, because buddies would not know, have fingerprint access, and two, if they did share their employee number and password to clock in and clock out, you would notice that because of a setting we're going to look at here in just a bit called a manual entry. There's the option here to print a little slip of paper out on your receipt printer every time you clock in or clock out. If this setting is enabled, that print it on clock in, clock out, it will print a little slip of paper out of the receipt printer. Basically a physical representation of your clock in and clock out. You have the option to completely disable a FasTrax time clock. With this next setting, disable time clock, and then the default time clock type. And what this does is, if you don't have this checked, whenever you clock in or clock out on the register, it's going to prompt you, what type of entry is this? So it would prompt me, is this a break? Is this a lunch? Is this a standard entry? If I have this set to a default time clock entry, and I choose like standard, then it's not going to prompt me when I clock in and clock out. It's going to just always use the standard type. So then I couldn't really clock out for lunch or a break. It would just be I clock in, and then I clock out for lunch, and then I clock in. So theoretically, it looked like I'd have 2 shifts for the day. All right, so that goes over the POS settings. Now, using the time clock is very simple. By default, whenever you are on the home screen of the point of sale and you're logged in, you'll see the time clock option here. If you choose the clock in, that will bring up the window. I have the time clock force enable authorization on. So then I will either press the fingerprint button to prompt for a fingerprint on the biometric reader, or I can clock in using an employee number and password. So I can choose the employee number here, and then we can see there's my time clock details for the past 7 days. I can print that out, I can close the window, or I can clock out. Now, you can also have a button on your register. I've got one on the cashier functions panel. So I've opened the register up. I'm going to choose the cashier functions. And then I've got a button here for time clock. So this way, if I'm actually ringing sales up, I don't actually have to close the POS down for someone to clock in or clock out. They can just simply walk to the register, choose the cashier functions, press the time clock button, and then be presented the same options as the home screen. All right, so that covers the POS usage. Let's go back to Director now. Let's look at some of the administration functions of the time clock. So the user I'm logged in is a time clock admin, which means they can view all time clock entries and change those if need be. So this was changed in the most recent update. If you choose a time clock entry, let's say I choose this one and I'm editing that, I can see an adjustment history. This adjustment history will show any kind of changes done to this particular time clock entry. So I can see the original in time and the original out time. And then I can see what it was adjusted to, this value right here, and it was adjusted. There's my adjusted time out, my adjusted time in. We can see the time clock type, and any kind of notes that were on that. So if I make an adjustment, say I want to adjust this again, that break entry, so I'm going to make that to 7:45. And I save that. When I go back in here, we'll see there's that second adjustment right there. There's my notes, there's my original type, there's my adjusted type. So it's going to keep track of a log of any type of time clock adjustments. Before, there was no log, so this is a brand new, fantastic feature for tracking any kind of time clock adjustments. Now there's the entry type, and these can be managed by Time Clock Admin by choosing that Manage Hyperlink. And you have your time clock types. I can edit types by choosing that Edit button, or I can build a brand new one by choosing the Add button, entering in a value, and choosing Save. You may have types such as a break, lunch, your standard. You may have holiday, sick time, vacation time. There could be a variety of different types that you can keep track of in the system. All right, so we're going to close out of this. Now, on the screen here, you'll see that there is now a manual and an edited column here on the time clock screen. If the time clock has been edited, that entry has been edited in any way, you'll see that that checkbox is filled out, meaning that that entry from its original clock in, clock out on the point of sale has been changed in Director in some fashion. So you can always click on that and view the change history. 2, there's a manual column, and this is for letting you know that if the employee that clocked in or clocked out did not use a biometric reader. Anytime you don't use a biometric reader, it's going to tag that as a manual time clock entry. That way you can quickly see who didn't use a biometric reader, because the HP RP9 systems that come with our system utilize those biometric readers to help prevent buddy punching. All right, so that covers this screen on the time clock. Now let's look at this newer application that was built to run on the corporate side. It's called I'm going to open it up right here. It's called the Time Clock Viewer. And this is something that can be casted to a display, can be put on a monitor, something to quickly see where personnel actually is. You have your out type, so people that are not clocked in. Notice it's color coded. You have your on break. You have your on lunch, and you're clocked in. So at any given time, I can quickly look at this screen and quickly see where my employees actually are. There's going to be one for every time clock type. So if I want to clock out, I can simply double click on this employee and choose clock out, and it's going to then present me my password. And then I can choose my clock out type. Is it a break? Is it a lunch? Or is it my clocking out for the day? Well, I'm going to choose lunch in this scenario. So now I have both these employees on lunch. Now, if you remember, in my settings here, my time clock, notice I have a forced lunch length for 30 minutes. So if I try to clock back in right now on this manager, it's going to give me a message stating that I can't. There's the time that I can clock back in. No matter where you try clocking in at, it's going to give you that same message. So I'm going to go to the POS now to try to clock in. I'm on the manager now. I'm going to try clocking in, and it's going to tell me there I can't clock in. That parameter you set in Director is going to force that length. So there's no way for this employee to clock back in until that time comes around. If you're ready to clock back in, like this cashier, they clocked out earlier, they can clock back in now because it's been greater than 30 minutes. Now they're back in. You can quickly see at a glance where that employee actually is. When they're out for the day, you can clock them out. And then now they're out for the day. This is a pretty nifty little program that just gives you a quick at-a-glance view of where everybody is. This program would also reside in your FasTrax folder, so under the C FasTrax directory by default. All right, well, that covers everything in this webinar. I hope you learned something new and saw some of the changes that have taken place. Once again, these webinars, they are every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern. You can see these if you go to our website, go FTx.com, choose the FTx Lifeline tab, scroll down and look for the Webinars button. And this page will allow you to register for the new webinars, view previous webinar recordings, and subscribe to that newsletter. If you have any questions on this topic, let us know at websupport@FasTraxPOS.com. And if you have any suggestions for future webinar topics, let us know at info@FasTraxPOS.com. Thank you and have a great week.